You're listening to the Vari Longmuir Podcast, episode number 15. Welcome to the Vari Longmuir Podcast, and as you may have guessed, I'm your host, Vari. Since stepping away from the 9-to-5 world back in 2009, I've been a creative director, illustrator, artist, business mentor, and coach to fellow creative types. The intention with this podcast is to offer a fresh perspective about what it really means to be a working creative. I'm offering simple strategies to add a little more joy to your days and sharing my own insights and lessons learned, often the hard way, from over a decade of being my own boss. Now let's get into today's episode. Hi guys, and welcome to this week's episode of the Vari Longmuir Podcast. I am so excited to have you here and be in your ears for the next 15 minutes or so. It might be shorter, it might be longer. I'm never quite sure how long I'll record for. In this week's episode, I want to talk to you about taking risks. This topic came up with a client last week, and I find the whole topic of risk taking super interesting. So I wanted to talk with you about it this week. With this particular client, the risk that she was on the fence about taking was a business investment. She'd been given the opportunity to advertise her business in a publication that was perfectly aligned with the work that she does and where her ideal clients and customers are definitely already hanging out. Now, a little side note here for the business people out there. This strategy is one of the best ways to connect with the people that you want to serve. Most likely, the people that you want to hire you or to buy your art or your products are already gathering in groups, both in person and online. I tell my clients all the time, you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. You don't have to start a movement. You just have to join the conversation that's already happening. Anyway, I digress. Back to risk taking. Now, this opportunity for my client was fairly low risk. It wasn't a massive financial investment, and there was a high chance that she would perhaps book some new clients or at least get some new newsletter subscribers and some awareness about her business and what she offered. So the question is, even if the level of risk is pretty low, why do we then resist taking risks so much? Here's why. As humans, we are wired for risk aversion, not risk taking. Our brains like to keep us safe. They like routine. They like to do what they know is safe. Now, back in the day, this was super useful and necessary for our survival on the planet. Taking risks literally meant life or death. But our brains also like to be efficient. They like to take the tried and tested path, the path of least effort and the path of least resistance. But the very nature of following what's known means that we're not stretching ourselves. We're not giving ourselves the opportunity to learn and the opportunity to grow. Our brains tell us that these known paths, doing what we've always did, will keep us safe. And for thousands and thousands of years, this worked really well for us as a species. But we're in a different time now. Our external world has changed and evolved dramatically. And thankfully, there are no saber-toothed tigers ready to pounce as we try to gather our dinner. Although that said, at times trying to navigate the supermarket with my kids feels a little bit like wrestling a prehistoric creature. The risks that we are exposed to on a day-to-day basis are not as life-threatening as they once were, but our brains still think they are. These beautiful brains of ours are doing their very best, and they want to keep us safe. But the risks we're faced with these days typically don't come with a life or death outcome. So, if there's no real threat to our life, why do we resist taking risks so much? In today's world, we avoid taking risks because the outcome has the potential to produce uncomfortable emotions. We have an aversion to risk taking because we fear having to experience things like failure, embarrassment, shame, things like disappointment, judgment, vulnerability. In the case of my client, initially she had thought that it was the financial investment that was holding her back from taking this risk. She was telling herself that she should wait until she had more money before spending it on advertising. But as we dug a little bit deeper, there was something more there. The deeper underlying fear about taking the risk was actually the fear of judgment. She was telling herself things like, who was she to share her ideas? She was telling herself that there were people more qualified than her to do this work. She started to consider, what if people gave her negative feedback? It's amazing what we as humans will do in order to avoid feeling uncomfortable. When risk is an option, our brains go to work telling us a whole heap of stories about why we don't want to feel uncomfortable and why we shouldn't take the risk. And if we ask other people for their opinion, then their brains will tell them the same thing and will likely just reinforce that idea that we shouldn't take the risk. Unless, of course, I'm your friend. And in that case, I'll tell you to go right ahead and dive in head first. It's our inability to sit with these emotions and allow them to be present that's causing them to persist. But here's the thing. If we allow ourselves to fully experience these uncomfortable emotions, if we allow embarrassment to be there when we mess up, if we allow vulnerability to come to the surface when we have to have that difficult conversation, then it actually passes through us. The psychologist and author Dr. Joan Rosenberg suggests that if we are able to sit with these emotions for 90 seconds, then they'll pass through us. 90 seconds, that's it. It's kind of mind blowing to think, right? That thing you've been avoiding doing because of the way you think you might feel, in my client's case, the judgment that she thinks she might experience by taking the risk to advertise her business, if that feeling does in fact come up, then sitting with it for one single 90-second wave is all we have to be willing to do in order to move through it. When we have the awareness that the worst thing that can happen is merely a feeling, and we know that all we have to do is to allow this feeling and let it pass through us, then we become unstoppable. There is literally nothing we can't do because there's no feeling that we are unwilling to feel and to allow. The capacity you have to experience uncomfortable emotions is directly related to the capacity you have for success. So don't let emotions, which are simply vibrations in our bodies, be the thing that's holding you back from taking risks and playing bigger in the world. Be willing to experience vulnerability and reach out and say you need help. Be willing to experience disappointment and pitch yourself for that dream job. Be willing to experience failure and put your art up for sale. Because when we know that the worst thing that can happen is a feeling, and we create evidence to prove to ourselves that we can, in fact, experience any emotion, it's in this place that we realize there is nothing between us and what we dream of. Being willing to feel every emotion and keep on taking action creates an environment where it is almost impossible to not get what you want. That's all for this week, guys. For updates, be sure and subscribe to my newsletter over at varilongmuir.com and come follow me on Instagram. I'm at Vari Longmuir. Thank you as always for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. If you enjoyed this podcast and you're ready to dive in deeper to create a business and life with intention, I would love to chat with you. Each month, I offer a limited number of discovery calls. I like to think of these as a casual first date. It's an opportunity for us to connect, for me to find out what's going on in your business and your life at the moment, and see if we're a good fit to coach together. These calls are completely free and with zero obligation. And I know from every single person I talk to, they leave with more clarity and more focus, whether they go on to work with me or not. So it's a win-win. There is literally nothing to lose. For more information and to book our virtual coffee date, head on over to varilongmuir.com/coaching.